We trust screens too much. A glowing rectangle makes us feel safe. The illusion of distance, the illusion of control. But what happens when something crosses that digital line? When a Zoom call becomes a window, not just to another office, but to something staring right back at you. These are not urban legends. They happened to ordinary people, and they could happen to you. My name is Chloe, and this story happened to me 2 weeks ago. I'm 32 years old and have a 10-year-old son named Jesse. Every now and then, the company I work for requires me to travel across the state and other parts of the country to take part in important business meetings that are mandatory for me to attend. Thankfully, my bosses are understanding of the situation. Jesse's father isn't in the picture, so my work allows me to bring Jesse with me on business trips. Most of the time, we stay in a rented lodge or an apartment. A few weeks ago, I had to go on another business trip. It was out in the country, which was nice because the house me and Jesse would be staying in was a small lodge, very secluded. The night before the meeting, I was on a Zoom call with my colleagues at around 10 p.m., while Jesse was upstairs playing on his Nintendo Switch. During my Zoom call, Jesse called me from upstairs, telling me I needed to see something. I excused myself from the call and headed upstairs. I went into his room and asked him what was wrong. He told me there was a man outside looking up into his window. I looked out into the dark field and couldn't see anything. I told Jesse I couldn't see anybody out there. He said the man walked off into the darkness as he called for me. What he said concerned me, but I brushed it off, as maybe it was a dog walker or something. I usually think rationally when it comes to things like that. I told Jesse to tell me if he saw the man again, then I returned to my Zoom call. About an hour went by when one of my bosses suggested we take a quick bathroom and drink break, leaving the Zoom call on as we usually do. I went to put a pot of tea on and went upstairs to check how Jesse was. I asked if he was okay and if he saw anything outside. He told me he hadn't seen anybody since. I tucked Jesse into bed and went back downstairs to continue my business call on Zoom. Most colleagues were back from the break, apart from a couple. One of my bosses said, "Oh, that's strange. I thought I just saw you walking around the kitchen." The laptop I was using for the call was set on the table in the living room, which was opposite the kitchen that also had a back door. I replied saying, "No, I was just upstairs." He said he was certain that he saw me walking around the kitchen. I laughed and told him he was seeing things. My pot of tea started to boil. I had forgotten about it. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed the back door was slightly open. I thought it was odd, especially given what my boss just said, but I chalked it up to Jesse forgetting to close the door. He was outside playing earlier that day after all. I closed and locked the door, poured myself some tea, and sat down to continue my Zoom call. About 10 minutes went by, and I started to feel funny, really sleepy all of a sudden. But it wasn't a normal feeling. I felt fine, and then suddenly, I couldn't keep my eyes open. That's what happened. I fell asleep on a Zoom call. I didn't know at the time, but I was out for about 10 minutes until I woke up to Jesse frantically pulling me, trying to wake me up. He told me there was a man outside trying to get in. I turned around and saw a man on the other side of the back door, pulling the handle in an aggressive way. He looked furious as he couldn't get inside. That meant what my boss said earlier, when he thought he saw me in the kitchen, was true. That man did get in the house as I was upstairs checking on Jesse. He must have spiked my tea, and that's what made me fall unconscious. Once unconscious, I think he was planning to enter the house, and, assuming the door was still unlocked, to take my son away. The thought of this makes me sick to my stomach. I thank God that I noticed the door slightly open and locked it shut. This story could have had an awful ending otherwise. We called the police and they searched the area, but not surprisingly, they found no one. Jesse and I returned home after that. This incident will haunt me for the rest of my life, and Jesse's too. I'm an office manager, and being the manager of a company has its perks sometimes, but it also means I have to be the one to let people go. In this one instance, I had to fire a man named Hooper. What made it awkward was he was dating my best friend, Olivia. She had asked me to give Hooper a job, and since she's my friend, I gave him a 4-month trial basis. I won't go into too much detail about why I needed to fire him, but basically he just didn't know how to do his job. I had to let Olivia know the day before I was about to let Hooper go. She was understanding and thankful I gave him a chance. That following morning, I called Hooper into my office and told him that we were letting him go. He didn't really say much, but the expression on his face was surprised and also a little mad, which is understandable. He left the office, and I carried on with my day as usual. Later that evening, I got in my car, but before starting it, I received a Zoom call from my bosses. I'll skip most of the conversation because it's private and irrelevant. At one point, one of my bosses said, "Courtney, please tell me you have finally fired Hooper." I replied, "Yes, I have." Then my boss said, "Thank God he was useless," letting out a laugh with some of the other bosses. Later that night, I was in bed asleep and woke up to what I initially thought was my phone ringing. But after listening more carefully, I realized it wasn't a phone call. It was a recording of some kind. I kept hearing it on repeat. Thank God he was useless. Thank God he was useless. Thank God he was useless, with laughing in the background over and over. It was the Zoom conversation I'd had with my bosses earlier that night. I looked around my room and there was an old tape recorder sitting on my cabinet. Someone had broken into my house and put that there. I went downstairs and saw the front door was open. Of course, the first thing I did was call the cops, and I told them I suspected it was Hooper who had put the recording there. What's creepy is no one had seen him again, not even Olivia. She said that he just vanished and stopped responding to her calls and texts. People lose their jobs every day, but it's scary to think how some will react. I don't understand what Hooper's intentions were with that recording, and quite frankly, I don't think I want to know. You can call me Derek in this story. I'm 23 years old and had recently landed myself an intern job working in the city office I moved to. It hasn't been as good as I thought it would be. My boss and other managers always drop extra work on me, and I usually end up staying in the office way later than everyone else. This one Thursday was no different. I was stuck in the office past 11 p.m. I was on a Zoom business call with people across the country, and some were across the world. There weren't many people in the call, about 4 others, not including myself. 3 of them were guys I knew. They were from the same company across town. The other caller I didn't know. On Zoom, you can get dozens of people on at once, so I didn't think much about it. The 4th person I didn't recognize was in an office that was dark, but there was no doubt someone was there. I could see them sitting down in a dingy office, but I couldn't make out any features. One of my coworkers left the call, and then I asked the remaining 2 who the other person was. They both said it was probably someone I won't name, who had just gone to make coffee or something. The two co-workers then signed off, and it was just me and the other person on the call. I carried on with my work. After about 10 minutes, I got up to use the bathroom and grabbed a coffee. As I was pouring, I heard something tip over in one of the nearby offices. It sounded like a stack of papers falling. I called out, "Hello!" I was startled, yeah, but not completely terrified. This is a massive office building. There are plenty of people who could be working late. When I got back to my desk, I looked at the Zoom call. That's when I got freaked out. The one person who was still on had stuck a piece of paper on his camera. On it was written, "Hello." I typed in the chat box, "Who's the person on the call?" Unsurprisingly, there was no response. Then, the Zoom call ended. I was scared and felt like going home, maybe taking my work with me. As I was packing, I received a phone call. I answered, "Hello." There was no answer, but definitely someone was on the line. I could hear light breathing. I spoke again. "Hello, who is this?" Then the phone went dead. I put the phone down, grabbed my bag, and walked to the elevator. Once inside, I pressed the button for the bottom floor. Just then, a light turned on in an office down the corridor, and I heard a door slam shut right before the elevator closed. That was the last weird thing that happened to me that night. It was the creepiest experience I've ever had. Unfortunately, I still have to stay late sometimes. And now, I'm always paranoid about who's around me. I never feel alone when working late. 3 stories, 3 screens, 3 times when reality bled through the glass. We think Zoom connects us, but maybe it only opens the door, a door anyone or anything can step through. Next time you're in a late-night call, ask yourself, who's watching you when you're not watching back? My name is Kenneth. I'm 22 years old, and this story happened just a couple of months ago. I had just gotten a job working nights at the Amazon warehouse near where I live. On my shift, there weren't that many of us. Most of the time, it was just me on my own doing my work somewhere deep in the warehouse. I think it was my second night at work when the security guard introduced himself. His name was Vincent. He was a large man, slightly overweight in his late 30s. But the thing that struck me right away wasn't his size. It was how quiet and reserved he was. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was low and short, almost like he was forcing himself to reply. Most of the time, he just stood there in silence. And sometimes I'd catch him staring at me, not saying a word, just watching with those heavy eyes. At first, it made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what to think of him, so I tried to keep my distance. One night, I was carrying a heavy stack of boxes when I slipped a little. The load nearly toppled over me, but suddenly, Vincent was there. Without saying a word, he grabbed the top box and steadied it before it could crush me. I looked at him, startled, and muttered, "Thanks, man." He just gave a stiff nod. His lips moved slightly like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He lingered there for a second, eyes flicking toward me, then back down, then finally walked away. That moment stuck with me. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe beneath his cold and silent exterior, he was actually a decent guy. A few days later, he approached me again, this time slower, hesitant. His eyes shifted to the floor as he spoke. Friday? Beer? Movie? It was halting, almost as if he hadn't talked to anyone in a long time. He looked embarrassed, waiting for my reaction. I hesitated. Normally I'd have said no. I didn't really know him, and his constant staring still unsettled me. But then I remembered how he had helped me with the boxes. Maybe he was just shy, bad at socializing, but genuinely trying to connect. So I smiled and said, "Sure, man. Why not?" That Friday evening, me and Vincent met up at a bar near where we work. Everything went okay, I guess. He didn't talk much, mostly listened, sometimes gave short replies. I tried to fill in the silence, telling stories about old jobs and sports. We had a couple of drinks, then decided to head out to the movie theater. That's when things began to shift. We bought our tickets, and before heading inside, I told him I needed to use the bathroom. I was standing at the urinal, doing my thing, when I heard the door creak open. I couldn't hear footsteps, but I didn't think twice. Then, turning around, I froze. Vincent was standing there. His head tilted slightly down, but his eyes were locked on me, unblinking. His lips pulled into a strange, almost forced smile. I laughed nervously. "Jesus, man, you scared the hell out of me." But he didn't laugh. He didn't even move. He just stared, silent, that weird smile frozen on his face. A cold shiver ran through me. I quickly zipped up, brushed past him and muttered, "I'll wait for you outside." That was the first red flag. When we sat in the theater, I tried to focus on the screen, but from the corner of my eye, I could see him again. His body turned slightly, not toward the movie, but toward me. His eyes were fixed, unblinking. I didn't want to check. I didn't want to confirm it. So I glued my eyes to the movie, heart pounding. And then I felt it. His hand sliding onto my thigh. That was it. My whole body froze, then bolted up. I whispered harshly, "I'm out." And I walked straight out of the theater, not looking back. The following week at work, Vincent approached me again, his voice low, as if nothing had happened. "Hang out? Again?" I stared at him, confused, a little angry. Didn't he get the message when I walked out? I said flatly, "No, I'm busy." I went back to my work, hoping that would be the end. But it wasn't. For weeks, he kept trying, asking me again and again, calling, texting. Each time, I ignored or refused. My patience was running thin. Finally, one night I snapped. When he came up to me again, I cut him off. "Listen, I don't want anything to do with you. Leave me alone." I turned away, focusing on the boxes in front of me. He just stood there for a moment. Then, without a word, he walked off. I thought that was the end. Boy, was I wrong. Later that night, I decided to take a short break. I headed to the bathroom, sat down in one of the stalls, and pulled out my phone to check some texts. Then I heard it. Heavy boots, thumping down the corridor, stomping closer, louder, until they entered the bathroom. My gut clenched. Before I could react, the stall door exploded inward, slamming into me, knocking me backward onto the floor. And then he was on top of me. Vincent. His hands pressed down hard on my face, trying to smother my mouth. Then they closed around my throat. I thrashed, clawed, gasped. But his grip was iron. His face hovered above mine, red, sweating. His eyes stretched wide and wild. His lips curled into that same twisted smile. I couldn't breathe. The world dimmed. I thought I was going to die. And then, suddenly, he let go. He stood up, staring down at me with those frantic eyes, chest heaving. Then, without a word, he turned and stormed out. I lay there gasping, clutching my throat, waiting for him to come back and finish the job. But he never did. Shaking, I ran to the manager, reported everything. We checked the CCTV. Sure enough, the footage showed me entering the bathroom, and a minute later, Vincent rushing in. But when the police came, Vincent denied it all, claimed he just went in to check something. And without physical evidence of the assault, the charges were dropped. He kept his job. I couldn't believe it. Justice had been ripped away from me. There was no way I could keep working there, not with that maniac still roaming the warehouse halls at night. I quit soon after, found a new job. But I'll never forget Vincent. And I pray that whoever crosses his path next stays far, far away. I love modern warfare, and I usually play for hours on end. If you don't know what that is, it's a Call of Duty game. My name is Michaela, and a few months ago, I had a really bad experience due to playing Call of Duty. Usually I play with my friends, Mimi, Yaya, and Maya. We like to play hardcore team deathmatch or Warzone. To be honest, I'm not really that good, and probably the worst of my friends. There was one Saturday when it was raining and storming all day, so we literally played for about 15 hours straight. Late that night, everyone was getting tired, except me. Then this guy joined one of our games. His name was Promaster. From the start, he was weird. He kept whispering into his mic, low, creepy muttering. All of us thought it was strange. Then, suddenly, we all received friend requests through PSN. Out of everyone, I was the only one who actually accepted it. So, while my friends logged off to sleep, I stayed on. Game after game, Promaster was still there. Every match, I'd hear him whispering. He wasn't even good. He kept camping, so his KD was terrible. At one point, I did horrible in a match. Afterward, I got a message from him saying, "You put up impressive numbers, but your overall ratio is 0.2. Yeah, I know I sucked, but he wouldn't stop messaging me about how good I was. Trying to be polite, I just replied, "Thanks." And that was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, he constantly jumped into my Call of Duty matches. Every Friday, without fail, he'd send me a message. "I hope you have a good weekend." It was unsettling. He seemed like some creeper. I never responded. Until one day, he joined a game with me and my friends, a free-for-all match. After the first round, he said in his mic, "Good game, guys, especially you, Michaela." The whole party went silent. Then Maya asked me, "Wait, how does this guy know your name?" I froze, because my username wasn't even close to my real name. Before we could question him further, he disconnected. That was the last time any of us saw him online for days. 3 days later, he still hadn't logged back on. I even sent him a message asking how he knew my real name. No response. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he guessed it. But then, one night, everything escalated. I had just gotten home. I opened my blinds, got comfortable, threw on my hoodie, and started playing Modern Warfare in the living room. My friends were all on except for Melia. Nobody knew where she was. As I was waiting for the next match to load, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "Michaela?" Then a question mark. It was from an iPhone. I could tell because, when I replied, it turned blue. I texted back, "Yeah? Who's this?" The message showed as read. No reply. Suddenly, I heard it. Click! Ah! The distinct sound of a camera shutter. My blood went cold. I looked up at my TV, and in the reflection, I saw it. A flash. Coming from outside my window. I need to explain. The window was about 6 or 7 feet behind me to my right. That's where the flash came from. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Same number. It was a photo of me, taken from outside the window. I froze, staring at the image on my phone, then slowly turned. Through the window screen, a man was standing there, watching me. And then he lunged, clawing at the screen, trying to break in. I screamed for my dad. He came running downstairs. The man bolted, vanishing into the night. My dad ran outside to chase him, but it was too late. He was gone. One of our neighbors had seen the man and gave police a description. They made a sketch. I showed the cops the text messages, but the guy had simply vanished. I never saw him online again. Never got another text. He was just gone. But to this day, I still don't know how he learned my name. That night changed me. Now, whenever I play, I keep every curtain shut, every door locked. I can't shake the memory of that camera flash. Be careful. Because sometimes the creeps online aren't just hiding behind a screen. I was a state trooper for 25 years, and through the years, I experienced it all. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. This happened quite a few years back. I was on night patrol on an interstate at about 4:30 a.m. Now, I don't know if you guys know what the show Cops is, but basically, it's where cameramen would follow around real cops, filming everything that goes down. The episodes would consist of a compilation of the most interesting clips. The show was insanely popular, but unfortunately nowadays new episodes are no longer made. Back then, however, I was lucky enough to actually be featured on the show. Even though I didn't show up in many episodes, I still thought it was really cool. This night was one of the nights I had a cameraman following me around for the show. I remember his name was Joe, and he was honestly a pretty down-to-earth guy. Anyway, I would usually have my car parked near a bush to hide myself from the view of oncoming speeding cars. But at this hour, I didn't really ever try to hide too much. I remember we were just driving down the interstate. No, I didn't work in the best area. There were a decent amount of abandoned buildings visible from the road, and because of this, I adopted into my nightly routine to enter the parking lots of them, as they were hotspots for drug activity. One in particular was an abandoned gas station building. The exit for it was coming up, so I figured I might as well check it out. Joe started filming, and as we pulled up, we could both clearly see a flashlight moving around in the building. I pulled into the parking lot and put the car in park. At this point, I was almost positive some sort of drug deal was going on inside, as I could still see the flashlight moving around. But a part of me hesitated as there were no other cars in the parking lot. I also realized if there was a drug deal going on, there would have been at least 2 flashlights visible from the outside of the building. I figured either way I'd have to investigate. I went over to the cruiser's speaker, yelling out, "Police!" and explaining how whoever was inside needed to exit the building immediately. Right as I did this, the flashlight from inside turned off. It was now eerily silent. I decided I'd have no choice but to enter the building and to get whoever was inside to leave. So I did. I got out of the cruiser and proceeded to walk towards the wide open front door, with Joe and his camera not far behind me. As I approached, I couldn't help but notice a terrible smell. It was as if an animal had died in there and had been rotting for at least a week. I peeked inside with my flashlight, once again yelling out, "Police!" This gas station was small, so any sound could pretty much be heard from anywhere in the building. I stayed quiet for a second, just listening. That's when I swear I could hear what sounded like something being dragged across the floor from the other side of the building. "Who's there?" I shouted. I got no response. I walked inside the building, and in one of the back rooms I could see what looked like a figure. I shined my flashlight in the figure's direction, but right as I did, whoever it was bolted and eventually left through a back exit. I started chasing after the guy, but as soon as I exited the same back exit, I didn't see anything. Almost the whole area was surrounded by a cornfield, so there was no way I was gonna find this guy, but I figured I had to try. I ran out in some random direction, but stopped only after a few seconds, realizing it was pointless. Defeated and still confused as to why the guy ran, Joe and I went back to the gas station. But what we found left behind made it perfectly clear. There in the back room, we found the lifeless remains of a dead body. I immediately called for backup, explaining the situation. Unfortunately, the guy responsible was never found, and the body itself couldn't be identified for obvious reasons. What we caught on video that night was never used in the final show. When I was 17, my mom had a job that required her to be out of town a lot, and because of this, my dad would often take me out to eat for a good part of my teen years. I remember one night we both decided to go to Pizza Hut for dinner. It was around 7 p.m., and my dad had just finished up his shift at work. Back then, my dad worked as a police officer, and at least at the time would work pretty normal hours. Anyway, we went to Pizza Hut and got our usual. On our way back home, I remember we were pretty deep into a conversation, though I don't remember what it was about. After a while, I noticed my dad wasn't really responding anymore. We were fairly close to our house, but still on main roads before we needed to turn into our neighborhood. At first, I thought he just lost interest, but I glanced across and noticed he was permanently looking in the rearview mirror. I asked him what was up, and he mentioned how the car behind us had been following us ever since we left the Pizza Hut parking lot. I glanced behind us, And sure enough, some blacked-out SUV was tailgating us. My dad mentioned how we needed to verify if this car was actually following us. He proceeded to pull into the next street and do a few turns, just to get back onto the main road. I will never forget that sinking feeling as I watched the car sharply turn back behind ours. Now it was around 9 p.m. on a weekday, so there weren't that many cars on the road. The car behind us then put its high beams on, and at that point, my dad was completely focused. He had fully shut me out, putting all his attention into losing whoever was following us. A few minutes of this went by when he told me to grab his phone from his pocket, call someone in his contacts, and put it on speaker. My hands were shaking at this point. I could barely press the buttons. I remember a cheerful voice answered, but before the guy could say anything else, my dad quickly summarized the situation. There was a pause, and I could hear voices speaking in the background, along with radio beeping sounds. My dad was yelling at me to keep naming the streets we were on to the guy on the phone, as at that point, my dad was still randomly turning down different streets trying to lose the car behind us. Okay, turn into Tesco car park. It's coming up on your left. We've got 3 response vehicles coming in from the other direction, the voice said. My dad responded, and as we swung into the near-empty car park with the car behind us, still in close pursuit, blue and red lights quickly surrounded us in what felt like all directions. The sound of sirens was deafening. My dad bolted out of the car and ran in some direction. After a few minutes of shouting, the driver's side door swung open. My dad got in and calmly started driving away. As we turned around in the car park back towards the entrance, I could see the police surrounding the vehicle that had been following us, and 3 men in what looked like their late 20s were handcuffed, leaning over the car. On our way home, my dad told me everything. He explained that he was on a drugs team that dealt with the interception of large shipments of drugs that were being transferred across the country, something I hadn't known until that point. He continued by saying people would lose a lot of money when they were caught, and some didn't like that, which sometimes resulted in specific officers being targeted. My dad would quit his job as a police officer a few years later, though he admits this was by far his most disturbing experience, especially considering I was along to witness it. I'm 22 and recently became a highway patrol officer. I would usually patrol less busy highways, and like I said, I was just recently hired, so in terms of experience, I didn't have much. I'm not going to lie, the first few weeks were kind of stressful, especially considering us patrol officers almost always worked in one-officer cars. Though at this point, being about 3 months in, I was a lot more comfortable with the job. I almost always worked night hours, usually from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At first I thought it was annoying, but the more I did it, the more I realized why. I would give out countless tickets to the late-night reckless drivers, way more than I would in the day hours. Anyway, I was driving down the highways like I usually would. It was around 2 a.m. on a Thursday and was honestly pretty dead. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour. These highways were almost completely covered by forest, so I would always try to go at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out in front of me. I was driving for around 10 minutes and I hadn't even seen another car. Usually I'd have at least one car pass every 30 seconds or so, even at this time of night. As I rounded another bend, I noticed a vehicle with its hazard lights on maybe a quarter mile ahead of me. It was some sort of dark-colored sedan, angled so that only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest of it jutted out onto the road. As I got closer, I noticed the driver's side door was flung wide open, meaning it was pretty much covering the whole lane. I obviously couldn't ignore this. People always say, If there's a warning sign, you'd better listen. But when I was 12, I didn't. The night before our school trip to New York, I sat watching the evening news. The anchor's voice was grave. Several young girls had been found murdered in dark alleys across the city. The killer was still free. The warning was clear: never wander into secluded places. Less than 24 hours later, I would break that rule and come face to face with the smile of a monster. 6th grade meant one thing: the big end-of-year field trip. That year, it was New York City. For kids who grew up in a small town with nothing more exciting than a strip mall and a gas station, the idea of walking the streets of Manhattan felt like a dream. My best friend Olivia and I already had a plan. Forget the boring tours of historic buildings and the lectures from teachers. We wanted clothes. New shoes, new outfits, things we couldn't find back home. Olivia had even drawn a map the night before, circling the best shops near where the bus would drop us off. She was proud of it. I was impressed. The teachers, of course, warned us 100 times. Stay with the group. No wandering. No exceptions. But we were 12, restless, and convinced we were smarter than every adult in the room. We promised each other we'd slip away the first chance we got. When the bus finally pulled into the city and 60 kids spilled out onto the sidewalk, it was chaos. Teachers tried to herd us like cattle, calling out names and waving their arms, but no one noticed when Olivia and I hung back. Then, just like that, we were gone. For the first 20 minutes, it felt perfect. The city lights glared overhead, taxis honked endlessly, people moved in every direction like ants. Olivia tugged me from store to store, and soon our arms were heavy with shopping bags. We laughed at how easy it had been. We thought we'd beaten the system. But New York is the kind of place where you never really know who's watching. Yes, sudden. Is he on Miss Bo? That's when we noticed him. At first, it was just a voice, loud, too friendly, and aimed directly at us. Hey girls, you want more clothes? More jewelry? I'll buy you everything you want. Just come with me. Olivia squeezed my arm, her smile faltering. We didn't answer. We just kept walking, trying to melt into the sea of people. But his voice didn't stop. Every few steps, he called out again, his tone slipping from playful to impatient. I glanced back over my shoulder. He was there. Tall, unkempt, his eyes fixed on us in a way that made my stomach twist. At first, he was far enough back, maybe 30 or 40 feet. Just another face in the crowd. But the longer we walked, the closer he drifted. 20 feet. 15. And he wasn't smiling anymore. His mouth was flat, his eyes narrow, like a predator annoyed his prey wasn't cooperating. "Buzz off!" I finally shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice shook anyway. But he didn't buzz off. He just kept coming, weaving through the pedestrians with that same relentless stare. I told myself he couldn't hurt us. Not here. Not in front of 200 people on a crowded street in broad daylight. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Why? Olivia clutched her shopping bags tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Don't look at him," she whispered, though her own eyes flicked nervously over her shoulder every few seconds. Her face was pale, lips trembling like she was fighting not to cry. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest ache. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my brain kept repeating, If we run, he'll chase us. If we run, everyone will see. If we run, it'll be real. So we tried the only thing we thought might work. We sped up, weaving through the crowd, hoping the mass of people would swallow us up and lose him. For a few seconds, I thought it was working. I couldn't hear his voice anymore. But then I glanced back. He was still there. Same distance, same stare. And when our eyes met, he smiled. Not the kind of smile people give when they're friendly, but the kind that says, "I know exactly what you're thinking. And I'm not going anywhere." Olivia muttered, "He's still there. He's still there," like a mantra, as if repeating it could make it untrue. Her steps quickened, her shoulders hunched. I could hear the ragged sound of her breathing. We ducked into another street, then another. Each time we hoped he would give up. Each time he turned the same corners, never breaking pace, never looking away. By then, my palms were slick with sweat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my bags. My throat felt tight, like it was closing up. It hit me then, the news report. The anchor's voice replayed in my head. Do not go into secluded places. Stay in crowds. And yet, even surrounded by hundreds of strangers, I had never felt more alone. "Hi." Olivia's voice cracked as she whispered, "Let's just cut through here. Maybe we can lose him." Before I could protest, she tugged me sharply by the arm, pulling me toward a narrow alley between two buildings. The noise of the street faded as we stepped inside, swallowed by shadow. The city's chaos, the car horns, the conversations, the footsteps, all vanished behind us, replaced by silence. It smelled like garbage and something sour like rot. The walls pressed close on either side, graffiti scrawled across the bricks. A single flickering light buzzed overhead, barely illuminating the way forward. That's when I remembered the news broadcast. The words I'd brushed off the night before echoed inside my skull. Several young girls found dead in alleys. Killer still at large. Do not wander into secluded places. And now here we were, in an alley, alone. At first I thought maybe we'd lost him. The pounding of our footsteps echoed strangely, and for a few precious seconds I dared to hope. But then his voice floated into the darkness behind us. Low, mocking, delighted. "You can't run. I'm going to kill you. They'll never find your bodies. You'll see how much fun this is going to be." I froze mid-step. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to turn around, but I didn't need to. His voice was enough. Olivia's breath hitched. "He's here," she whimpered. And when I finally glanced back, he was there in the half-light, just a silhouette at first, then clearer as he stepped forward. His grin was stretched wide, grotesque, teeth glinting. He wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't offering gifts. He was promising death. My legs trembled so badly I thought they might give out beneath me. Olivia's eyes were wide, tears spilling down her face. We both knew this was the moment the news anchor had warned about. This was the moment we weren't supposed to survive. "Indadin!" "Run!" Olivia screamed, her voice breaking with panic. She dropped her shopping bags, clothes spilling across the dirty ground, and bolted forward. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, lungs burning, heart hammering in my ears. The alley stretched endlessly ahead of us, the flickering light casting warped shadows that seemed to lunge with every step. Behind us, I heard it, the sudden, pounding rhythm of footsteps. Faster, louder, gaining. I risked a glance over my shoulder. That was when I saw it. The man wasn't just chasing us. He had a knife, a long, gleaming blade raised in his hand, reflecting the sickly light as he sprinted toward us. And he was laughing. Not a full laugh, but a breathy, manic chuckle that carried across the alley like something inhuman. "Olivia!" I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat. My legs felt like rubber, every muscle screaming, but terror pushed me forward. My vision blurred with tears, but I kept running, because stopping meant dying. The alley opened wider now. I could see daylight at the far end, the crush of people moving along the main street. Safety. Hope. But he was too close. I could hear the slap of his shoes against the pavement, the rasp of his breath, the metallic hiss of the knife slicing the air. My chest burned. My legs screamed. Olivia sobbed beside me, stumbling but refusing to stop. We screamed until our voices cracked, until the sound hardly even left our throats. And then we burst out of the alley, colliding with the crowd. Bodies jostled us. People muttered complaints, but I didn't care. I shoved myself into the mass of strangers, clawing my way deeper into the tide of human life. I looked back one last time. He hadn't followed. He stood at the mouth of the alley, the shadows wrapping around him like a cloak, the knife still dangling from his hand. And on his face, the same twisted grin, fixed on us like a brand I knew I would never forget. By the time we hit the sidewalk, both of us were hysterical. Olivia's dress was ripped, her face streaked with tears. My arm burned where it had scraped hard against the brick wall, leaving a smear of blood. We clung to each other, sobbing so hard we could barely breathe. A woman stopped in front of us. She crouched down, concern etched across her face. "Sweetheart, what happened? Are you hurt?" We tried to explain, but the words tangled in our throats. All we could manage were broken gasps, shaking heads, frantic gestures back toward the alley. She glanced that way, but the man was gone. Somehow, between sobs, we told her the name of our school. She looked it up on her phone, then called the teachers. Within minutes, we were being marched back to the group, our teachers' faces pale with anger and fear. They kept us right at their side for the rest of the trip, refusing to let us so much as step out of line. We didn't argue. We didn't tell them about the man either. Maybe we were too scared they wouldn't believe us. Maybe we were too scared they would. When I got home, my parents grounded me, took away my phone. I didn't even care. I was just thankful to be alive. School ended a few days later. When I finally got my phone back, Olivia texted me. She sent a picture our teacher had taken of the whole class, standing in front of some famous building in New York. At first, it looked normal. Kids smiling, teachers waving, a memory from a trip we were supposed to enjoy. Then Olivia's message appeared. "Look in the bottom left corner." I zoomed in, and my blood ran cold. There he was. The man, half hidden behind a wall, his eyes locked on the camera, his lips stretched into that same deranged grin we had seen in the alley. He'd been there the whole time, watching, waiting. Nas. Hey. We never talked about him again. Not to each other, not to anyone. But I'll never forget that smile. And I'll never forget the warning on the news the night before. Do not wander into secluded places. I didn't listen, and I still wonder if he's out there, waiting for the next kids to make the same mistake. Me. Ha ha.